I'm thrilled today to introduce you to Professor Alexander Serebrenik, who's going to join our class. And he is a professor at Eindhoven University of Technology, and he's been there since 2008. He has a PhD from the Catholic University of Leuven in 2003. And an interesting tidbit, although he teaches in the Netherlands, he lives in Belgium on the other side of the border, which I'm sure makes for some interesting border crossings in these days. His research area is empirical software engineering, which is the topic of our course. So super to have you here. And he studies both social and technical aspects using a rich blend of methods from mining to surveys and interviews. And Alexander's prior experience includes, actually, I didn't realize this till this morning, but database query languages. I knew you did some work in static analysis and process modeling, and of course also in software evolution, because he's the co-editor of a Springer book on software evolution. More recently, a lot of your research, Alexander, has been on focusing and supporting diversity of software development. And in fact, I saw that most of your research would probably fall under the label of action research, which we have been chatting about a little bit in our class. I hope you would be okay with that label. And you've looked a lot at gender. You've also looked at transgender development and also older developers. One of your papers on the 40 is the new 60 was one of our optional readings. And for today, in preparation for this Q&A, our course watched your fabulous keynote from CVSoft 2020. It's truly an excellent summary of the many projects that you have been working on. Very impressive talk. And you discussed how your research uncovers how good or poor diversity may impact individual, team, product, and process factors. And in particular, I personally found the connection between diversity and the process smells, and then to the product smells, to be really fascinating discussion in your talk and in your research. Before we go on to the main Q&A for your visit, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about what led you to looking at diversity research and particularly the focus on women and, women diversity and software engineering in particular. And maybe you even want to tell us what has been the main challenge that you faced.
Oh, there are lots of challenges, right? It's probably the easiest part of your question. One of the challenges there was, we submitted a paper to about behavior of people of different genders to the leading software engineering conference, and this paper has been desk rejected because, of course, gender in software engineering is not software engineering. So this was 2012, if I remember correctly. So I'm extremely happy to say that 8 years later, well, even something like 6 years later, you see many, many more papers focusing on human aspects and specifically on diversity aspects, both in software engineering, both in this conference on software engineering and other conferences. So essentially, it is a kind of uncomfortable topic in a sense, because it comes very close to you as a human being, while we traditionally have been training generations of computer scientists to focus on technology as some kind of thing in the vacuum, right, which has no human connection whatsoever. And in a way, one of my students has opened his a report by stating software developers are humans. Citation needed.
Oh, that says a lot.
Says a lot, right? That essentially says a lot, right? That's a kind of attitude which we are struggling with. So how it all started is it started mostly from the collaboration with Andrea Capellupi, who was working back then in the United Kingdom, and in the United Kingdom there was this Athena Swan effort and all kinds of oh, Andy, yeah, Andy said, I used to start all my talks with the phrase software developers are people. So next time when you're using this, just add citation needed. We need a proof, because otherwise, right? No, yeah, so essentially, it was
But we could even question that a little bit, because a lot of bots are committing code, so.
Yeah, right. But bots also, I'm sorry, bots are also people, right? They, at least the smart ones, right? Those that it can, they are imitating human beings in a quite successful ways. They can
Okay.
chat, they can collaborate, they can offend people.
Okay. Yeah, good. All right. Good point. So thank you for sharing with us how you got into this topic. I can tell you that the course, all of the students in the course were fascinated by your talk and by actually the following papers that we'll discuss as well today. So we do have a lot of questions, which I'm afraid we won't get to all of them, but we'll try to get to as many as we can. So I'm going to start with some of the questions that looked at understanding kind of this lack of balance that we're seeing in our community. So if Zane is there, would you like to jump in and ask maybe the first question?
Okay. Okay, I guess I'll start with my question then.
Great.
Yeah, so my question is, do you have any thoughts as to why some countries seem to have a higher percentage of women learning ICT as opposed to other countries? So specifically, what are some of the factors that may be involved? For example, does it depend on what they're learning in high school, like the high school education? Are they exposed to ICT at an earlier age? Like, what are some of the factors or things that may lead to such an effect?
Thank you very much for this question. The fact that there are differences between countries and cultures suggests that the reasons are most likely not related to biology, but related to culture. And indeed, exposure to software development and to software engineering is one of the elements, but it's definitely not the only one. It's also very much about what kind of expectations society has for people of different genders. And how software development and computers in general are being positioned in this space. If software development is a very nerdy thing, which is typically how it was and is portrayed in popular media, then we should not be surprised that it attracts nerdy types, and most of those classical nerdy types happen to be men, right? So this is one of the reasons. Another thing is, how do you position it? So when I'm talking to colleagues from India, for instance, they say that in India, software development is being seen as a good thing for girls because it's an office job, meaning you have an air conditioning and or ventilation. It's essentially you are kind of protected. So I would be, I would not be necessarily thinking about presence of air conditioning as an important factor to choose for software development. But this is how software development is being seen. I studied in Israel, in Jerusalem, and software development was a quite popular choice for ultra-Orthodox women, Jewish ultra-Orthodox women, because it allowed them to avoid any kind of contact with men, because they could work with single gender teams, because they could work from essentially without contact with men. So it's not only about percentages, of course, but culture influences those things.
Super. So Zane, did that address your question quite well?
Yeah, I think that was really good. Yeah.
We have some follow-on ones that come back to this again as well, thinking about what we're teaching in school and what other kind of interventions we can do. So we'll continue that with future questions. Nimi, would you like to ask your question?
My question was like, even though the number of females engaged in IT industry increases over time, the proportion of female versus male seems to be remaining constant. Um, what do you think the reason for that?
Well, because essentially nothing changes. So the people we see choosing software development as profession are probably the very same people that would have been choosing it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and so on. So yes, there are more of them because it's becoming more popular profession, but they're essentially pretty much the same people. Nowadays, I mean, my numbers are coming from the Netherlands. So I don't know how it plays in other countries. nowadays we see more people are looking into things like data science and AI, and we are looking that there are more girls who are choosing for this kind of educational programs because this is less nerdy, because this is less stereotyped, at least. We will see what happens with those people in 10 years. And well, will they see themselves as computer scientists or software engineers of any kind, or will this be a different branch? And our statistics will still be showing the very same 1 out of 5%.
Great, thank you. Actually, that is a good lead-in, I think, to our next question that maybe Cassie could ask, because she's looking at the different kinds of roles that women can take on. So Cassie, would you like to pop in?
Yes. So my question is related to a statement that you made during your presentation where you said the role that women tend to take in groups of, they take this role of mediation and communication, and as such, they reduce the likelihood of problematic scenarios such as radio silence. Why do you think that women tend to fall into this role of mediation?
This is unfortunately where my knowledge stops. I really don't know. I know that this has been repeatedly observed. For instance, there is a study of Miriam Razavian and Patricia Lago on feminine expertise in software architecting. So what kind of expertise is usually being associated with women? And one of those is indeed communication within the team, communication outside of the team, but it's very often communication. I don't know why. Do you have any conjectures?
I'm not sure. I think it could be a societal reason. You know, as you grow up, I think that women tend to have to mediate situation. I don't know, maybe some communication skills are taught throughout your life, and you're kind of told that you have to kind of balance, you know, kind of make people feel comfortable, if that makes sense, as a woman, and not really rock the boat, I guess. So you're kind of always this balancing act of like trying to maintain the peace, but that's just like, that's not all women, obviously. So that's just sometimes how, you know, like I feel yeah, I mean, there's times where I'd be in a situation where I'm mediating, you know, there's times where I'm in projects, a lot of like in undergrad where, you know, I would enter this role of mediation, but sometimes it's like, I want to participate in the actual coding. And that's the problem. Like sometimes, you know, for me anyways, I would fall into this mediation role when I'm losing an opportunity to learn to program or to learn something more about the project. And there's just a loss there, like the loss of learning. That's my opinion. That's my personal experience. I can't speak for all women, but yeah, I don't know. Like I don't have all the answers either. Obviously, a more thorough study has to be done and with interviews and stuff. But that's my experience.
It's a very thoughtful response, Cassie. I can't say that I know it either, but I've also wondered. And it's a nice lead in actually to the next question that Anthony could ask about coding clubs.
Hi. So at the end of your talk, in the Q&A section, you mentioned that you think gender-separated coding clubs is less controversial than gender-separated schools. So I'm just wondering, what makes you think that way? So I think having gender-separated coding school could potentially increase women's confidence in coding because there are more role models, right? Like female instructors, more female peers. But isn't that also gonna increase the barrier between male developers and the female developers because they don't have a chance working together?
So sort of like there are two parts here, right? So coding clubs are, of course, additional extracurricular activity, and you as a parent can decide whether your child is participating or not. As opposed to its school is mandatory. So it's essentially, it's a governmental initiative where you don't really have that much choice. You might be choosing which school to attend, where kids attend, but not whether they attend, right? Essentially, the classical arguments against single gender schools would be things like, first of all, the advantages are not really very obvious in terms of empirical data. Second, society is not single gendered, right? So it is not clear how the individuals who have been attending single gender education will be somehow facing people of other genders outside of this world. So coding club is, in general, plays a much smaller role. And I guess this is yet another difference, right? And things which can work on a smaller scale probably will be controversial on a larger scale. But then again, I've just found online that in the United States, for example, roughly 30% of Catholic schools are single gender. So maybe they are much less controversial in the States than in the Netherlands. I don't know. Can we run a small poll? Can you please raise your hand if you have attended a single gender school?
I think, yeah, it's not so common. So leading on to that, Jordan is looking at other ideas of how to achieve, balance. And so I'll let her jump in and ask this question.
Yeah, I just wanted to know your inputs and thoughts. So with the current trends in diversity and inclusion in software engineering, do you think that leveraging social media with critical influencers would have an impact on community standards and positive inclusion?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There was a highly successful Twitter campaign. I look like an engineer. You might have heard about it. Danae Ford had a nice paper about it. So women have been tired of being told, you don't look like an engineer, and they have started taking selfies with this small piece of paper stating, I am an engineer. So trying to diversify who software engineers are and how software engineers look and how they behave breaks those negative nerdy stereotypes which have been associated with our field for far too long.
That makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Alexander. Thanks, Jordan, for that question. A little bit related again to sort of ideas and thoughts on achieving balance. Rohit has a question.
Yes. So my question is, do you think having gender-specific tools and processes in software industry will help in gender parity?
Gender-specific tools and processes. This is tricky. I would probably be more in favor of gender-inclusive tools and processes rather than necessarily gender-specific ones. The last speaker of your today lesson is Anita Sarma, and if you want to know anything about gender-inclusive tools and processes, please talk to her because Anita has done a great job on gender math. And gender-specific tools are always dangerous, right? Those famous pink artifacts which have exactly the same functionality as the non-pink ones, but are being marketed for women. And essentially, and cost, twice, 3 times more. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, Alexander.
Please go ahead, begin.
Yeah. Anita's coming to do an activity with Gender Mag today, but won't be speaking. But we did post a link to their talk, to her and Margaret's talk, and also to a paper on that. And I think they do go into that a lot about sort of gender inclusivity tools. But we'll see what the participants in the course think about that after the activity today. So we'll get to that. I think Ansh is next, if you would like to step in.
Yeah, hello. So my question is like slightly indirect of your talk, but it's more of an insight question. So like a lot of people are thinking short term, and they think that incentivizing for hiring more women will result in hiring of less men, and there's some backlash because of that. And I was just wondering, like, what is the healthy balance for a company to figure out how to incentivize one gender without discriminating another?
Thank you very much for this question. So strictly speaking, I don't believe that it's a cake of a fixed size, right? It's not necessarily that you, by hiring more women, you'll be hiring less men. It's just the way how you are going to hire them and how you are going to involve them. So in addition to gender inclusivity, in my talk in Brazil, I talked about our Iran Curie program, which was essentially a very successful program. And if you look at, we successfully hired many good researchers, but it was found to be discriminatory. So at the moment, the question is, where is the boundary? How far we can get with balancing the things? And it seems to be the boundary seems to be on 30%. You know, it's a random threshold as any other random threshold. But the guidelines seem to say that if you have less than 30% people of a single gender, you are allowed to open a job position for people of this gender only, and for at least a limited amount of time, right? You cannot make this position for people of this gender only forever, right? It should be time bound. This seems to be the current idea, the current ideas of our executive board. We will see what the Human Rights Council will say about it, but it's trial and error.
Yeah, and I guess it's like you're trying to off-put the great imbalance right now, right? And with that, you have to go the other way a little bit until it kind of, in ideal world, equilibrizes just a little.
Yes, you want to solve urgent problems first. And also do not forget that we are not the single university in the Netherlands, right? So of course I would love to have the best candidates ever, but if I'm a man, if I know that I cannot apply in Eindhoven, then there are 10 other universities in more or less, 2, 3, sometimes 4 hours drive, right? That's it.
Yeah, thanks, Ansh, for that question. Great question.
Just to tack onto that a little bit.
Yeah.
So we're covering this exact same topic right now in Engineering 297. Again, I feel like these courses are just mirroring each other all the way up to the top.
That's a good thing.
But yeah, in Engineering 297 right now, we were just talking about affirmative action and how people often say things like, oh, well, we want to hire the best employee. Can't we just hire the best employee? Why do we have to hire like this female employee versus this male employee? But like the situation currently is that oftentimes we're hiring men who aren't the best employee, right? Because the system is weighted that way. So like, if hiring more women doesn't mean that if you're the best in your field and you're a man, you won't get hired. Like, we're still looking for that 50-50 split. It's just that you have to be good to be in your field instead of just being a man.
Yeah, I mean,
add that in.
It's slightly more careful. It's slightly more tricky than that. Partly because there are very few women who of a certain degree of seniority who would be applying for jobs, because if you have a certain degree of seniority, you're usually established, right? So you need to be looking much more into what this person can bring rather than what this person has already achieved. You need to be looking at more junior people. At least this was our experience, my experience with hiring, which doesn't mean that it is bad, right? It simply means that you need to be looking at the things from a different perspective. Another thing is that it is we are definitely not the only university who is trying to hire women. So what happens by now is that we are offering jobs to quite a number of women, but they simply refuse.
Thanks for jumping in. And Jonathan, well, many of the students did share some personal experience and stories in their blog posts, which I know that you also looked through, Alexander. And yeah, that was a really, thank you for sharing that, Jonathan, in your post about that situation that you faced. We're almost at the end of our time. Dylan had a follow-on question actually about the Irene Curie program. So maybe Dylan, you would like to ask that.
Yeah, I mean, it almost pretty much got answered, but it was, my question was, are these more forward incentives like the one the Irene Curie program provided, the catalyst that we need to make these large scale changes in software? Yeah.
Well, I would probably not dare to say that this is the catalyst. It can be a catalyst. It's obvious that it is not enough to hire women. You also need to somehow make them happy in your company or in your university. And this is much more important than, just hiring them. It's also the case that, I mean, it's not the first attempt, right? Our university and several universities have tried many different things. So the previous things did not work. This seems to work, at least given the limited number of data points and the limited observation period. But at least it seems to work so far. So yes, I think that as a catalyst, it can be a good idea.
Thank you. And there's actually quite a few questions about being anonymous. So maybe I'll just try to fold them into one question, because several people were asking, what is the impact? Is being anonymous a good thing, or is it not a good thing? Do you have some opinions on that?
It's a mixed bag, right? We have seen that anonymity helps transgender software developers because they can hide part of their personal information and so on. At the same time, we of course know that anonymity can lead to harassment and can lead to all kinds of unacceptable behavior due to lack of social control. So in a way, I mean, it's not that binary, right? It's either everything is clear and observed, or nothing is clear and observed. It's essentially a matter of control. You ideally should be able to control which part of your identity is disclosed and which part of your identity is not disclosed. And an ideal platform should not force you to disclose things you don't want, and at the same time should not censor you on disclosing things you do want. Mm-hmm. So if you are a person who does not expect any kind of harassment, you will probably be automatically filling in the form without thinking twice whether it is your name or pseudonym, whether this name is disclosing that you are a woman, whether your male discloses that not a gender you are presenting, and so on and so forth. But if you have this kind of concerns, then the platform you use should be able to support you in making decisions.
Thank you, Alexander. I think that is a great insight. That very much it's about control, and that we need to make sure that we have control, and that we step in and maybe suggest that, that is introduced if we see in a situation where it isn't. And I know that you also went through the blog posts where the students identified some of their own personal experience, and that you shared with me at least one resource that I can post on our webpage for today. I don't know if you had a quick closing remark. We are at the end of our time, but if you had a quick closing remark that you wanted to make.
First of all, I would like to thank you, Peggy, for inviting me. It was a great opportunity for me to talk to you, to hear your questions, to hear your stories. I have seen several questions on Zoom. I'm afraid at the moment I will disconnect, they will disappear. But if you can add them to the Google Drive document, please do so. And I will do my best to answer your questions in the coming days. I cannot promise you that I will be able to do it right now. You have a great lineup of speakers: Emerson, Andy, Anita, and of course Paige, who is the secret participant. So I'm sure that you will learn a lot about diversity and diversity-related topics. So we did not talk today about the other kind of diversity aspects I've been looking at, namely age. And this is scary because, there is a certain degree of certainty in this age thing, right? It's just a matter of time, and if you are alive, you will be there. So if you look at software, at blogs and at magazines and whatnot, essentially at public discourse that labels developers aged 40 plus as old, and some of them even at age 30 plus, right? If you see recommendations that boil down to pretending to be younger than you are by performing plastic surgery, by working extreme working hours, working during the weekend, by modifying your CV. So you should not be saying you are from University of Victoria, you should be saying you are from UVic because it sounds cool. Right, so all those signals that you are younger seem to be, I mean, I find it, personally, I find it scary. I really find it scary. Yes, we looked at US-based news sources, so cultural aspects definitely playing a role there. But of course, we also know that US is a dominant culture. So whatever you have in US today, you will have in many other countries tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Alexander, for bringing that to our attention, and so that everybody's aware of that, as well as all kinds of diversity. I'll switch us to gallery view so that everybody can wave or say thank you to you in the ways that they can, and the best way that we can in this process. And thank you very much. And we will continue to share that Google Doc with you so that perhaps you can answer our questions.